There's a kind of belief that there's a single pattern of modernization. That's come out of basically the European experience, but as interpreted by American social scientists in the 1940s, 50s, 60s. And that's more American, more US, United States, than it is the whole world. And of course, the big difference, the really big difference between anything that happens in the USA and everywhere else in the world is a weak state and a strong market. In some countries in the world, patterns of modernization depend on stronger states and weaker markets, but not necessarily totally absent markets. So there's a whole variable system of a variable idea, conceptualization of modernization. China is a very, very large country with lots of people and lots of variety within it. So unlike former colonial countries like the United States or smaller countries like Germany, France, UK, developing, modernizing those countries is relatively easy compared to the modernization of China, which has to bring together people who initially didn't all speak the same language, who have different customs and ways of doing things, and of course in China what you have is a variety of economies and societies that have to, as the Third Plenum recent Third Plenum resolution says, have to become a unified market, and that's still a long way off. Yeah, I think it goes back to what I was saying to you before. The balance between the state and the market in China, particularly given the Third Plenum resolution, emphasizes a strong state, but also a strong market. The function of the state in many ways is to regulate the market. I mean, I read in the Third Plenum something really quite exciting, that the market has not been abandoned. It's the market, everybody knows the market is a good distributor of resources, a good creator of innovation. The Third Plenum says that. But the Third Plenum also says that those things cannot happen without regard to the environment, without regard to people's standard of living, without regard to ensuring that people don't just become materialist agents without thinking about the values of society as a whole. And that's a very big difference. So what China now seems to be saying to me is, yes, we want modernization, but we want it through a strong market which will deliver us some things, but also a strong state which will deliver us others. Not many countries have tried that, and those countries that have tried it have tended to abandon it because they're competing with the United States, and the United States doesn't operate that way, and so they think the United States is a better way to go. Not something I believe, but it's something that lots of countries have decided for themselves. The obvious example is Margaret Thatcher in the 1970s, 80s, who of course completely ruined the British economy by trying to ape the practices of neoliberalism that were rampant in the United States. The difference, of course, between those two countries is scale. Again, that goes back to China's big difference. China is a big country. It can experiment more, like the United States in a sense, but the UK couldn't, and it ruined the country. You need private, or at least non-state sector of the economy, because it's better at innovation. It will be better for developing high-tech, advanced technology. But you need the state to ensure that its efforts are put in the right direction, do not lead to a distortion of wealth in the society, and do not lead to a wastage of capital. So these two things have to go together. And that's where, state-owned enterprises, the state sector of the economy, is necessary for doing some things. Let me give you an example. Transport within China has improved out of sight in the last 20 years through changes to the rail system, through roads, through all kinds of things. and of course through the internet and advanced AI and digital communications. That would not have been possible without a strong state. Not in China anyhow. And where it has occurred in other countries, it's been less than efficient, because what happens is you wander into monopolies, which just exploit people all the time. That's not happened in China. China's had competing telecom companies run by the state, which is, a very, very good way of doing it. But you can only do it if you have a country the size of China of that huge scale. So the balance between the non-state sector and the state sector is crucial for the development of the country. It has 300 or so action points. This is not a blueprint. This is a series of aspirations. That means these are things the government, the party state would like to do. And there's no question that they're serious about it. I mean, some people outside China have said that they're just aspirations and they're not serious about it. But that's not true. The government really would like these things to happen. They're difficult. But by highlighting them and saying, these are things we need to do, and recognizing that there are difficulties, you can at least start to do them. If you don't do that, you're never even starting to do them. So I think that's achieving a unified market was impossible before there were adequate communications. Communications are still not as good as they need to be, but they're a lot better than they used to be. You can move goods around much more easily now in China than you could 40 years ago. But these things will come in time, and with that will come, one hopes, one expects, a unified national market as the localities come to agree on the ways to do things. I was really excited when I read the Third Plenary Resolution. It seemed to me worth waiting for. And I don't know if you've read some of the American and British commentary on the Third Plenary Resolution and so on. It was really just not understanding what was being said or how the Chinese policy system works. The criticism that this is full of aspirations and no details is not a criticism. That is how the system works. Plenums of this kind always have aspirations. The detail comes afterwards. When you try to put policy into practice, you start implementing it, and then you see how things go. That is the Chinese system. It's been like that for a long time. It works. And of course, the advantage of one of the reasons it does work is, and has to work that way, is because of the size and scale of China and the variety there. People just don't understand that. Chinese modernization is going to be different because of a number of things. One of which, without any question, is the balance between man and nature, between looking after the environment, basically. You can't just go around raping the land and taking its resources all the time and spilling carbon into the atmosphere and all that stuff. No. So one of the things that I noticed quite recently was that it seems like China's carbon emissions peaked earlier this year. That's to say, they're now on thanks to the renewable, the creation of energy from renewables, the amount of carbon being pushed into the atmosphere, which is a large problem in terms of destruction of the environment, although it's not the whole story, has already gone on a downward turn, which is good. But there are other aspects of it too. When you build a dam, what happens to the environment in that area? When you take things out of the ground, how do you replace them? How do you manage this? Not just the environment, the foliage and the animals and the land, but also the living conditions for people. These are very important considerations as development takes place. And of course, if we're making a distinction between Western modernization as it was before and what China is doing now, China's learned from the experience of other Western countries that you can't just take the model as it was 50, 100, 150 years ago and push it into the Chinese context. Because, first of all, lessons have been learned, and secondly, there are new ways of doing things. I'm a great fan of electric vehicles. In Australia, we don't have a huge number of electric vehicles because there's no infrastructure to support them. But of course, one of the things I noticed in China when I've been living there is that from about 2020, I do beg your pardon, from about 2020 to about 2023, there was a huge development of infrastructure to support electric vehicles on the roads. I was back in Suzhou, well, I've been back in Suzhou a few times in the last few years, and there are rapid charging stations on most roads, and they're very, very accessible, and people use them. And it extends way beyond just EVs and things like that, and AI even, on the digital economy. It goes into things like pharmaceuticals and new materials, and so on and so forth. I mean, just look at the quality of the roads in China, which are built with new materials that have been designed. They're not necessarily all naturally occurring. They're new materials that use science to develop road surfaces that are more hard-wearing, that adapt better to weather and conditions and usage. All these things are fantastic advances which will benefit China in the long run, but of course can't happen without state intervention. Just can't. Any claim that the market will sort those things out just by itself is, well, you saw how that worked in South America in the 1990s and so on. It didn't work.